Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Wainwright, and I'm here to present on an article called Supporting Academic Language Development for Multilingual Learners Across Content Areas Through the Identification of Textual Features. This is a very wordy title, but it can be summarized as how do we use the features within the textbooks we teach out of to teach the language within them. So in this presentation, we will start with an introduction, as well as a brief background on the theoretical underpinnings of this study, then discuss how the authors got the information that they could use to write an analysis, and conclude with strategies for teachers and questions. Outcomes of this presentation are that by the end, you will be able to differentiate between academic language and everyday language, and secondly, that you will be able to describe the features of academic language in text. The reason for this study is that almost all of the academic instruction in American public schools is done in English. And as we know, not everyone in American public schools speaks English at the same level. Additionally, the form of English that is commonly used in schools is not the same as the language that students are likely to encounter outside of schools. Interactions with their peers, the media, and most other conversations outside of an academic setting use a different form of English. This adds another wrinkle of the language for multilingual learners to learn. So the authors set out to see how textbooks and their structure impacted these students' understanding of academic language. They did this by examining elementary level textbooks in English language arts, history, science, and math, and they examined the features within the text that support development of academic language. They did this applying a systemic functional linguistic approach, which is a group of theories that view language from a social perspective, where context plays a large role. So let's start by defining exactly what academic language is. The first thing about it is that it is formal, precise, and structured. In the MAT program, we are encouraged to have all of our communications, both with peers and professors, begin with a formal greeting, a message, and conclude with a formal signature. Everyday language, by contrast, would likely not use this structure every time. It is much more informal and fluid and does not rely on predetermined structures and patterns. Secondly, academic language uses content-specific vocabulary, which is vocabulary that is specific to the subject being taught. For example, in an ELA class, they might refer to the main character as the protagonist. However, in everyday language, they might refer to the main character as the good guy, or something along those lines. Lastly, academic language has a lot of meaning that is conveyed through content-specific vocabulary, technical terms, structures such as APA, and punctuation or headings. Everyday language gets most of its meaning through tone, gestures, and body language. Let's talk about the theoretical framework of systemic functional linguistics. The main thing about it is that it views language as fluid and dynamic based on the context that is at play. For example, a student asking their teacher for help with their homework is likely to communicate very differently than if they're asking their friend if they want to play kickball at recess. We all change the way we talk based on the situation, the audience, and many other factors. The researchers focused much of their research on the context within these books. They identified three variables. There is the field, which is the context of presentation. This involves the subject matter. For example, a teacher will use different language when teaching science than they will with history or math, etc. Additionally, the choices the speaker makes in presenting. For example, a speaker that is animated and silly conveys a very different message than someone who is dry, stoic, academic. The next variable is tenor, which is the context of relationship. This includes the mood that the author or speaker uses. Are they declaring statements? Are they asking questions with interrogative tone? Are they using an exclamatory tone, etc.? This also includes the ways the text engages the reader, as well as builds upon their existing knowledge and experience. Last is mode, the context of structure. This entails the information in the actual sentences and the actual sentences themselves, as well as how they're structured. The author's stated goal for this study was to identify academic language features so teachers are afforded ways to engage students in linguistic aspects that support their development of academic content knowledge, and language. This is translated to everyday language. This is saying that they want to identify what academic language is so teachers can find ways to identify it and support students accordingly. The authors did this by analyzing textbooks written in English language, and they looked for language patterns that came up across different content areas. They analyzed 4 subjects, which were English language arts, history, science, and math. The authors applied a systemic functional linguistics framework and looked for context as well as how the text engaged the reader and common patterns in the language used across content. In doing so, the authors identified 4 features of academic language. They are content-specific vocabulary, information packaging and lexical density, content focus and organization, and lastly, formality and precision. And we will unpack each of these further in its own slide. The first off is content-specific vocabulary. This refers to the language that is used specifically in the content area. Some people think of these as technical terms. For example, protagonist in English language arts or matter in science. While the word protagonist is less likely to come up outside of an academic setting, a word like matter has different definitions. For example, that matters a lot to me means something very different than matter as it is applied to science. And it is important for teachers to make sure students are aware of the different contexts in which words such as matter come up. English language arts employs the least content-specific language across content areas because the focus is mostly on storytelling. And there's fewer emphasis on the imparting of knowledge and new terms. As you might guess, an increase in content-specific vocabulary is indicative of an increase in linguistic complexity. As the terminology gets more difficult, understanding it also becomes more difficult. This is something to keep in mind with all students because there is no guarantee that they are familiar with academic language used in previous classes. And it can be especially challenging for multilingual learners who might not have had that same foundation in previous grades. The next factor is information packaging and lexical density. Information packaging is the structure by which information is presented within a sentence. Generally, the simpler the sentence is, the easier it is to find the meaning of it. The simplest sentence are single clause sentences that just stand alone. For example, there is a dog. The more complex a sentence gets, the more commas, the more conjunctions, etc. we add, the more difficult the meaning is to find. These texts, and especially as texts written for an elementary level audience, used a lot of very simple sentence structures. It was usually a standalone independent clause, or sometimes a compound sentence connecting clauses with a conjunction like and. Most of the passages also used a declarative tone. They're textbooks. They are declaring facts to students. This makes sense. However, the science text took the step of using interrogative sentences to connect with the reader. Right? A question, for example, does a book have more mass than a flower? The answer is yes. This connects directly to the reader and asks them to use their existing experience and knowledge to connect to this content. The next feature is content focus and organization. In each of these content areas, the language used reflects the important skills within each of these content areas. For example, science, describing things as they are in the present tense and in the natural world, focuses on specific declarative sentences. Math, by contrast, uses conditional reasoning, using the word if. An example in the text is, if Sally spends this much time at the pool, how much time will she have left for homework? Right? If something is true, how will it affect this other thing, is a common feature in math. The texts also use content as the active participant in verbs, which brings focus to it. For example, in the history text, they used the actions of historical figures in relation to the context of history, using past tense verbs. This puts the subject matter as the focus and makes it seem active, as if the content matter is doing these verbs. Lastly is formality and precision. As we know, one of the benefits of academic language is that it can be very precise because it uses very specific vocabulary. However, for someone who's unfamiliar with that vocabulary, that can make academic language very hard to understand. And as students progress through grades, this language grows ever more complex. One thing the authors identified in the English Language Arts and Science text is that they made use of second-person pronouns, you. This not only aligns more closely with everyday language, but it engages them directly by specifically referencing the reader. In the history text, however, the pronoun they was used quite a bit to describe different groups of people in different sentences. In one sentence, they referred to the American colonists prior to the Revolutionary War, and in another sentence, the word they was used to describe the British, which are very different groups of people, although they were referred to by the same pronoun. So what does all this mean for teachers? Well, one thing is that we know that teachers don't only teach content, but also the language of their content area. By developing academic language skills in students and encouraging them to not only memorize and learn new words, but develop strategies to identify them, learn them, and navigate through them, they will be more successful in later grades as the content vocabulary increases. The authors also identified two strategies for teachers of multilingual learners to use in developing academic language skills in their students. The first is that teachers should pay special attention to pronouns in text, as they carry a lot of linguistic meaning. They identified the use of second-person pronouns, such as you, as especially important, and especially in the lower grades, as it creates a more tangible connection to the reader, and also invites them to bring their own knowledge and experience in. Additionally, teachers should make sure to identify the features of academic language in the texts they teach out of, and in doing so, that makes them able to address these while teaching and support students accordingly. In conclusion, we know that academic language is part of the educational process and will always continue to be. As students learn more content, they will be exposed to more and more complex content vocabulary. Therefore, while academic language does support precision and understanding in a content area, it can also present a barrier to students, as if they are unfamiliar with it, it can be hard to decipher and does require specific decoding skills. By teaching students to use meaning-making strategies and establishing connections to the texts they read, teachers can develop skills in their students to help them navigate academic language in the future. In reading this article, I identified 3 questions that I will be asking myself as I develop my teaching practice, and I encourage you all to do the same. The first question is, what academic language is used in your content area, and how do you present it? Secondly, what strategies do you use to connect academic language to students? And third, how does the structure of the text support understanding of it? These are questions I will be asking myself moving forward. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for watching.